At 89.3 FM, this is member-supported WPFW, Washington.
We people who are darker than blue, don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true.
Good evening, everyone in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. If you are listening to my voice right now, if you are hearing me, that must mean it is 5 o'clock on Friday, and that must mean it is darker than blue. That's right. I am Jacqueline Lukeman. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you very much. And this is the show Darker Than Blue, where we talk about politics for the people who you just heard Curtis Mayfield describe as darker than blue. And no, sir, we do not intend to stand around this town and let what others say come true. And one of the things that we are talking about today, you just heard about in the news segment here, we have got to really dig into this attack on education that is absolutely freaking people out. And I understand it. But again, I feel like I do this every week, but this is why I do this, because this is information we need to know to help us to understand how to fight what is happening. Because see, despite what a lot of people understand about what is going on right now, about what you just heard in the news segment about the Trump administration giving Linda McMahon, the newly appointed Secretary of Education, to dismantle the Department of Education. Now, okay, we're going to talk about why that executive order doesn't make sense, doesn't do what he said it's going to do, because Trump said, oh, we're going to shut the Department of Education down once and for all. Well, maybe not, but let's talk about it. All right. So yes, Trump did sign an executive order aimed at eliminating the Department of Education once and for all. It's important for us to know that Congress and federal law stand in the way of doing that, which manages federal loans for college, tracks student achievement, and all this kind of stuff. So I had to get some information about this from the New York Times, because, you know, sometimes, like I always say, as much as the New York Times lies for the U.S. government and are the paper of imperialist record, if you read the entire articles, you will get a little bit of a kernel of truth somewhere down around paragraph 10 to 15. So this is what I do. And in this article that was written yesterday, published yesterday in the New York Times by Michael C. Bender, Eric L. Green, and Alan Blender, they write that President Trump on Thursday instructed Education Secretary Linda McMahon to begin shutting down her agency. It's not her anyway, a task that cannot be completed without congressional approval, and it sets the stage for a seismic political and legal battle over the federal government's role in the nation's schools. And there's the sticking point, y'all. We don't understand what the role of the Department of Education is in the nation's schools. So we're going to talk about that. All right. Now, the department, this article says, which manages federal loans for college, tracks student achievement, and supports programs for students with disabilities, was created by an act of Congress. That means, according to Article 1 of the Constitution, you know, that document that all of the conservatives have been crying and screaming about they are in love with and must adhere to all of this time, but now all of a sudden the Constitution doesn't mean anything, but the Constitution does say about the establishment of the Department of Education that quote, only Congress can shut it down. Rather, I'm sorry. So that was not a quote directly from the Constitution, but there is a clear delineation of power. Congress established the Department of Education. A president cannot abolish the Department of Education just by signing an executive order. That's not how it is supposed to work, right? Okay. And they say in this article that this is a fundamental component of democracy from the inception of the United States. It underscores why no other modern president has tried to unilaterally shutter a federal department. But this article goes on to say Trump has already taken significant steps that have limited the agency's operations and authority. Since Trump's inauguration, his administration has slashed the Department of Education's workforce by more than half. You just heard him say that they have done that and are going to do more, have eliminated $600 million in grants for the Department of Education. The job cuts hit particularly hard at the Department of Office for Civil Rights, of course, which enforces the country's guarantee that all students have an equal opportunity to an education free of all kinds of discrimination, racial, gender, disability, all of that. Now, Trump's executive order contains contradictory guidance for McMahon. Because on the one hand, the order directs her to facilitate the elimination of the agency. On the other hand, she's also mandated to rigorously comply with federal law, but the order doesn't offer any guidance on how to square the two competing points. So literally, the executive order directs Linda McMahon, who, yes, if you are a wrestling fan, you know who Linda McMahon is. And yeah, we're going to have to talk about that one day. Her husband and the legal trouble that he is in, which is why he had to step down from being the CEO of the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, because of sexual harassment allegations and some other nefarious dealings that he was involved with. But yeah, his wife was appointed by Trump to be Secretary of Education. And that was the reward for the loyalty that the McMahons, Vince and Linda, have shown Trump. Because again, if you're a wrestling fan, like I am, if you're a wrestling fan, you remember Donald Trump being a guest on several WWE shows. So these people's relationship goes back a very long time. That is why Linda McMahon was selected as or chosen by Trump to be the Secretary of the Department of Education. Okay, that's where she came from. That's why she's in this position. So Trump has told her to dismantle an agency that he appointed her to head, and he appointed her obviously to dismantle the agency. But the Constitution does not allow the agency to be dismantled by anything other than a congressional mandate that established it in the first place. So Linda McMahon cannot do anything to get rid of the Department of Education. The most they can do is pretty much what has already been done. And some of that is legally questionable, because a couple of days ago, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to reinstate tens of thousands of jobs that they cut, because there was no one who had any authority to fire or lay off federal employees who were doing the actual laying off and firing. So because people who did these things didn't have the legal authority to do it, a judge said, nope, you have to reinstate all those people. I don't think it's been done yet, and I don't think it will be done. But that's a part of the problem we have here. That is a part of the contradiction we are having to confront now about the nature and the efficacy and the legitimacy of these so-called laws, And how come we have been subjected to being beaten over the head with we have to be a law and order political party? Remember that this is the conservative line, right? That we always get. They're always stuck on law and order. And that's always in response to protests of people who are tired of being oppressed by unfair government policies, economic degradation, wage stagnation, and outright wage theft by corporations, union busting by corporations, and of course, extrajudicial killings by police. Every time the people rise up against these injustices committed against us by the government that's supposed to be a government of laws, the Law and Order Party, or the original Law and Order Party, the Republicans, they always bring up law and order in regard to people's alleged right to redress their government in protest. And law and order is the conservative response to that. Like, no, you really don't have a right to exercise your displeasure at what we're doing. We're going to lock you up. We don't want that. We demand law and order. You just take it in a lawful and orderly kind of way, right? But then Democrats, in order to appeal to so-called moderate Republican voters hoping to win elections against Republican candidates by appealing to these people and saying, hey, we can be law and order too. Where, as a matter of fact, remember I said a few months ago, remember that Joe Biden, in arguing for the 1994 crime bill, said on the floor of the Senate, I believe, when he was making his arguments for the bill that he co-sponsored and co-authored, he said, when we pass this legislation, no one will ever accuse the Democrats of being soft on crime again. That's what Joe Biden said back in the, what was that, late 90s, early 90s, in his advocating for the 94 crime bill. So this whole thing about we're a law, we believe in law and order, Democrats and Republicans, we're a nation of laws. If we are truly a nation of laws, how is it that the laws are being violated and the rulings from the courts are coming down declaring that the established laws are being violated, the Constitution is being violated, and the people who said they were law and order are not obeying the law? That's a contradiction we have to deal with and talk about what that means in regard to both political parties. Okay? But it is true that legally, Linda McMahon cannot dismantle, do away with, eliminate the Department of Education. She even admitted in her own confirmation hearing that she couldn't do it, that Congress would have to vote on it. That she admitted that. So Trump literally signing this executive order telling her to do something that the law that she even admitted the law does not allow her to do. What is that if that's not just flat out lawlessness from somebody who has, oh my God, the conservatives have made such a huge deal about the Constitution and the constitutionality of things. This is in violation of, we stick with the Constitution. We are constitutionalists. We're constitutional originalists. Constitution. That's all these people have been whining about, yelling about, screaming about for decades. And now that they are in power again, they are wiping their shoes. I'm not going to say the other thing, wiping their shoes with the Constitution. Trump and Musk aren't even wiping their shoes with the Constitution. They are just not paying any attention to the laws as they exist. And as the rulings are coming out, they are continuing on doing whatever it is they want to do, regardless of what the people who interpret these laws and issue legal mandates, just completely ignoring what these people do. So as we have been saying, since we've been here practically, these people that we are dealing with in this country, the descendants of the European settler colonial white supremacists, these people have never cared about any laws. Never, ever. They create laws to control you and me. The Constitution, these laws that they say that they are always in love with, those laws are not for them, and they know it. They create those laws to control us. So, all right, let's keep going. So Thursday, Trump said that the department would continue to provide critical functions that are required by law, such as the administration of federal student aid, including loans and grants, as well as funding for special education in districts with high level of student poverty. Now, the news segment right before this show, y'all, said that now Trump is saying that federal student loans will be managed by the Department of the Treasury. I read earlier today that the Treasury said they didn't want to do it. Now, do they want to do it? I'm not sure. Who knows what's going on? I don't, you don't. And that's the point. That is the whole point. You're not supposed to know what's going on. You're supposed to be confused. You're supposed to be in the dark. You're supposed to be afraid. I am hoping that the information I give you is going to help you to be a little bit less afraid and a whole lot more determined to join an organization to fight this. So let's go keep going through this. The Department of Education, the article says, would also continue civil rights enforcement. White House officials said, how they going to do that with one person in the civil rights office? At the department, they literally fired everybody. Linda McMahon, her first official order of business at the Department of Education as the secretary of the Department of Education was to fire a bunch of people from the Department of Education, even though she didn't have the authority. You understand what? So the Department of Civil Rights Enforcement in the Department of Education is practically unstaffed, with the exception of one person who I guess is the receptionist. Because there's nobody else in the department to enforce anything. So this is the way the Trump administration, and I have taken to calling them Trusk for Trump and Elon Musk, because, you know, Trump administration is too long and they deserve a really bad nickname, just like celebrities who date. I think giving them a nickname that's hashtagable is great. So hashtag Trusk, Trusk, Trusk apocalypse. Well, let's call it that. And shout out to everybody watching on Black Liberation Media, on Lukman Nation, on YouTube and Facebook, on Instagram. What's going on, all of you? Please stay tuned after this show, because yes, we will do some more stuff. And those of you listening on WPFW 89.3, you can watch as this show goes on as well. And you can hang out for the after party afterward in the dark room, where it is much darker and really steamy in there. You can do that by going to Black Liberation Media on YouTube, or you can go to my Patreon, patreon.com/LukmanNation, LUQMANNATION, where you can see Darker Than Blue every week as the show airs live. And you can also, through my Patreon, get access to some exclusive patron-only content, like weekly history rewind episodes. I do it every week, and all I do is talk about this history that is so important to understand in order for us to know how we got here and how we fight to get us away from here. All right. So I see somebody over in the chat on Black Liberation Media. David Silberg says, "In God we trust." No, don't leave God out of that one. But anyway, so Trump called the programs, the legally mandated programs that the Department of Education is supposed to carry out, the administration of student loans, the overseeing of special education and programs for disabled students. Trump called these programs useful functions and said they're going to be preserved in full, but we just established that's a lie. He lied again, because how do you know he's lying? His eyes are open. He didn't even have to move his lips. So Trump added that some functions would be redistributed to various other agencies and departments that will take very good care of them. I do not think he can do that legally, but again, what does it matter if the law says he can't do it and he's doing it anyway, and no one is stopping him? Okay. So aside from that, I think there are a few things we need to understand about the Department of Education and the conservative attempts to get rid of it. First, I think we need to be clear that, like we established, you cannot dismantle, eliminate, shut down, get rid of the Department of Education or any federal agency that was established by Congress with an executive order. So federal law states that the department cannot be eliminated outside of congressional vote to do so. All right. Now, this doesn't seem like Trump, or this might seem like the fact that Trump issued this executive order, obviously in clear violation of law. It might seem like he doesn't know the law, but I don't think that's true. I think, as we've said before, that he knows the law full well. What he wants to do is force a change in the powers of the presidency. He wants to expand that power and severely restrict the alleged powers of the rest of the branches of government. But I really got to maintain at this point, if the other branches of government have any power, what the devil are they doing to stop the violation of the federal law that separates the powers and limits the powers of? Okay, so federal law mandates that the Department of Education has to provide the critical functions mentioned earlier: the administration of federal student aid, including loans and grants, funding for special education, and for districts with high levels of student poverty. Now, the department would also continue civil rights enforcement, allegedly, I don't know how, with the one person answering the phone. So basically, Trump can't shut down the agency. Linda McMahon can't shut down the agency in violation of the legally mandated services the agencies have to continue to provide. He can't change who provides those services either. Other than the Department of Education. He can't move those services to another agency because the law mandates that the Department of Education has to provide those services. Now, a judge is going to rule against this executive order, I think, just like judges have ruled against so many of the previous executive orders. But the question is whether the Trump administration, or Trusk, will obey the judge's orders, because have they up to this point? And then the second thing I think we really need to know speaks to the cover provided by conservatives for wanting to get rid of the Department of Education, because their cover is a lie, and it always has been. Despite public opinion polls consistently showing that nearly 2/3 of voters, or a majority all of the time, oppose closing the Department of Education, Trump told the audience at his ridiculous executive order signing, that man sat at a little tiny wooden desk with the presidential seal hanging on the front of it. He was surrounded by children, and one girl was actually dressed up like him, also sitting at school desks with Republican governors and other officials standing around them all. It was just the most ridiculous, weird, creepy scene I think I've seen out of the White House since the first Christmas scene out of the Trump administration. Remember that? Remember that bizarre looking? Yeah, this was a very strange looking a PR stunt with him signing this executive order. But Trump says to the people in the room after he signed the executive order that the goal was to return our students to the states. That's what he said. And he goes on to say further, quote, Democrats want federal bureaucrats to control your child's school, something that Jim Jordan, an Ohio Republican who chairs the House Judiciary Committee, agreed with and amplified when he said that Republicans want to give parents the choice to do what's best for their children. Let me explain something to you all, dear listeners and dear viewers, very, very clearly. If you did not understand this before now, states already control local schools. Already. They always have. And every Republican governor and legislator in Congress and across this country knows this. They know they've been lying all this time. The Department of Education does not have control over the curriculum in local schools. In creating the Department of Education, Congress said, this is a direct quote from the law, quote, no provision of a program administered by the Secretary of Education or by any other officer of the Department of Education shall be construed to authorize the Secretary or any such officer to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over the curriculum, program of instruction, administration, or personnel of any educational institution, school, or school system, or over any accrediting agency or association, or over the selection or content of library resources, textbooks, or other instructional material by any educational institution or school system, except to the extent authorized by law. End quote. That literally says that the Department of Education cannot, by law, influence, suggest content for, change, create, remove, or in any way touch curriculum or the content in textbooks for curricula for public or private schools. Literally says that. Because responsibility for curricula falls on states and localities, the executive order that Trump just signed would not affect students' curriculum at all. So what the heck is the EO threatening to eliminate the Department of Education about if the curricula that everybody says they need to get rid of is not actually going to be impacted by getting rid of the Department of Education? I hope that made sense. Let me say it again. If the Department of Education does not actually do or mandate anything that does or impacts the curricula of local public schools or the textbooks that are used in local public schools in any way, and they cannot do that because they are mandated by law from doing it, then why were Republicans telling people all this time that the Department of Education is the reason for CRT, for woke curricula, for critical race theory, for DEI programs in public schools, for pushing gender ideology in public schools? If the law prohibits the Department of Education from influencing public school curricula in any way, why come the conservative politicians, talking heads, media people, and conservative voters? How come they've been telling you this lie all this time, blaming the Department of Education for things in their local curriculum that they don't like? And if the argument for getting rid of the Department of Education has always been because of their undue influence on local school curricula, if there is no influence of the Department of Education on local school curricula, then why do the conservatives want to get rid of the Department of Education so badly? If they've been lying to you the whole time about why they need to get rid of it, well, we need to understand that most conservative voters who want the Department of Education eliminated don't know that the department doesn't control their local school curriculum, but the politicians do. And let's not forget, y'all, that a lot of state boards of education and local school boards have been populated by Tea Party Republicans who came to power through grassroots organizing under Obama, who all set school curriculums that, of course, did not teach basic civics and began to attack history courses with the goal of ultimately working to get rid of the Department of Education. And it's crazy because these people literally showed how to take control of local school boards so that they could control their schools curricula. This was the whole narrative behind their organizing campaign, the Tea Party. This is why they were telling people, you have to run for school board. You have to run for the State Department of Education. You have to run for your local school, but you have to, get involved in the PTA and work your way up. Why? Because the Department of Education at the federal level is pushing this awful woke agenda on our children in our small town schools where we don't want any of that stuff because there's not enough of those people around here for us to care about the experiences that they've had in this country from our ancestors. No, these people have literally shown how to take over local school boards and how to control their local school curriculum while also at the same time complaining that the Department of Education at the federal level controls their local school curriculum. Both things can't be true. Both things have never been true. But this is why they're always saying that there's a bunch of lazy, that they don't want their kids to learn about or exposed about, all the Negro stuff, the Black stuff, and the weirdo queer stuff, and the anti-traditional gender trans stuff, and a bunch of commie, socialist, red, anti-American, anti-capitalist stuff that's being taught to their tender, precious little snowflakes, who apparently can't take learning about the genocide and enslavement of two entire groups of people carried out by their ancestors to establish this country. No, they were simply helping to spin a narrative about public education that helps them achieve their goal, which is to destroy public education. They're not trying to protect their children. No, they don't want public education. They're literally lying to conservative politicians. They're lying to conservative parents and voters. And honestly, people believe them because they play on the racial, gender, and social biases that their voters have. It is easier for these people to believe the federal government is forcing CRT and DEI and alternative gender ideology down their kids' throat than it is to admit that they just don't care about people, not like them. They don't care about history and what those people have experienced and still do, and they want their white children not to be made uncomfortable by being taught to care about other people who are not like them. These people feel like they've been forced to give a doggone about other people quite enough. Thank you very much. They're tired of being told they have to care about what their ancestors did to other people in this country. And they just don't want to deal with it any longer. That's from the conservative voter perspective, that's what this is. And it's weird because I thought they were proud of their Western civilization. No, how can kids be both too tender and weak to not be afflicted with survivor settler guilt from learning actual history, but also be proud of so-called Western civilization created by European descended people through violent and genocidal settler colonialism, apartheid, and ongoing oppression. I don't understand. And these are the same people now talking about how empathy, which is really just the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, to imagine yourself in their place and to see things from their perspective. Well, now, according to these folks, that needs to be done away with. That empathy is weaponized by the so-called left and whatnot. But they're demanding and even legislating a type of enforced understanding from the rest of us about why they have to not have these things that they're eliminating exist, because getting rid of them helps their progeny not feel guilty about their ancestors having zero empathy for the people they brutalized and massacred. I cannot make up this circular, insane, sociopathic logic up. And these lies about the Department of Education needing to be destroyed because they're pushing this, that, and the third, that's what they tell us. And instead of ignoring that garbage and countering them with facts and their own history, what do? We argue along the lines of the need for them to understand how we feel, show empathy toward us, and trying to appeal to their humanity. And I don't know why we keep doing that, when they are literally telling us we don't care about the history of what was done to you. They're never going to say what our ancestors did to your ancestors. They're never going to admit that what was done and who did what to whom and why. But we keep trying to think, or we keep thinking that if we just get them to see how important it is for them to acknowledge that, they will understand, and they will know they will not. We need to stop appealing to people's so-called morality. It is clear they have none. Or at least their morality is very different from ours. And we're going to talk about why that's true in a minute. But right now, we are a little bit past the 30-minute mark for this show. So you know what that means. That means it's time for a station announcement for you. So our engineer extraordinaire, what have we got for today?
African filmmaking from all corners of the continent and across the diaspora is featured at the 21st New African Film Festival, presented by AFI and Africa World Now Project at AFI Silver Theater and Cultural Center in downtown Silver Spring from March 14th to the 27th. The festival features 29 films from 19 countries, discussions with filmmakers, and more. The 2025 New African Film Festival features the diversity of new filmmaking from Africa. Tickets and full schedule at afi.com/silver. That's afi.com/silver, or at 301-495-6700. That's 301-495-6700. WPFW, building a better world, one broadcast at a time.
So thank you so much for that fantastic station announcement. That sounds so exciting. And I do love the cultural offerings that you get here by listening to WPFW, because you learn about cultural things that are happening throughout this city that you probably wouldn't have known about if you hadn't been listening to WPFW. So this is great information that we share with you, not just great music, not just great history, not just different ends of the political spectrum that's supposed to be to the left of the conservative ideology in this country, but you also get fantastic exposure to a lot of lovely, lovely culture. So let's get back to this situation with the Department of Education. So Representative Bobby Scott, who is a Virginia Democrat, who is the ranking member of the House Committee on Education and Workforce, said that Trump was, quote, implementing his own philosophy on education, which can be summed up in his own words: I love the poorly educated, end quote. And that refers to a remark that Trump made in 2016. Here's the thing, though, folks. Trump is not implementing his own philosophy. Doing away with the Department of Education is not Trump's idea. This executive order is not his philosophy. This philosophy actually dates farther back than Trump and even farther back than Project 2025. Now, to understand today's conservative attacks on higher education, we need to look to the ambitious pro-corporate agenda that was laid out in a 1971 memo that was supposed to never go public, called the Powell Memo. This memo is the subject of an article that was written in the Journal on Higher Education by Linda Stamato back in 2023. Now, she writes in the Inside Higher Education publication this article called "The Launch of the Long Game." And in this article, she points to the focus of public education in the Powell Memo from 1971, which was written by Virginia lawyer and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell Jr. for the Chamber of Commerce. Now, this memo has been described as a, quote, call to arms for corporations and a, quote unquote, corporate blueprint to dominate democracy, end quote. Now, we need to stop right here and get a clear understanding of what very important words mean. Because if democracy is defined as a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elective representatives, who are supposed to represent the ideas and the will of the people who elect them, then that means the people are supposed to be in control of democracy. That is literally the definition of democracy. The people control the system, and the people are responsible for defending it. But when elective representatives do not represent the ideas and the will of the people, but represent the ideas and the will of the corporate class, as Powell argued for in his memo, through indoctrinating voters to believe certain things favored by that corporate class, so those voters can then continue to vote for representatives who support not people's desires, but corporate desires that people are led to believe are theirs, then that makes the system no longer a democracy. That makes the system a corporatocracy, or, as we like to call it in the Black Alliance for Peace, a dictatorship of corporate and finance capital. That's what we live in today. So what did the Powell Memo say about education? Well, Stamato says in her article that Powell's 1971 memo to the U.S. Chamber of Congress asserted that, quote, the American economic system is under broad attack. And actually, the title of the memo is called that. That's the title, The American Economic System is Under Attack. And he envisioned a comprehensive, coordinated counteroffensive on the part of the American business community. In response, he singled out the campus as the single most dynamic source of these attacks. Powell saw, quote, bright young men from campuses across the country. Now, Powell is focusing on colleges here, but the conservatives took this and extended his ideology to high schools and all public schools. Okay, so Powell in this memo said these bright young men from campuses across the country who were seeking opportunities to change a system which they have been taught to distrust, if not indeed despise. They sought these opportunities to challenge free market ideology through employment in the centers of the real power and influence in our country, namely the news media and government, and as staff and consultants in elective politics as lecturers and writers, and on the faculties of educational institutions. Powell saw these bright young men remaining in key positions of influence where they mold public opinion and often shape governmental action, ending up in regulatory agencies or governmental departments with large authority over the business system they do not believe in. Now, these are the people who are attacking the free market system, according to Powell in his memo. So Powell wanted to see the development of scholars and speakers to be strategically placed on campuses to counter this. He envisioned attractive, articulate, and well-informed speakers exerting whatever degree of pressure, publicly and privately, may be necessary to assure opportunities to speak. He's literally talking about going into these institutions and bullying people for the right to speak on these campuses, whether they were invited or not. The objective always must be to inform and enlighten, and not merely to propagandize. This is what Powell says in his memo. Critical, too, was the need to evaluate textbooks to assure fair and factual treatment of our system of government and our enterprise system, its accomplishments, its basic relationship to individual rights and freedoms, and comparisons with the systems of socialism, fascism, and communism. Got to stop right here. Woo, time be galloping away. Notice he does not say in this section, factual treatment of our system of government, our enterprise system, its accomplishments, and the actual relationship to individual rights, or the history of the evolution of the relationship between the government and individual rights and freedom. He doesn't say to tell the truth, to tell the history of the development of this system of government and the so-called free enterprise system in this country, capitalism, basically. No, he is laying the guardrails. He's providing the framework for how this conversation is to be entered into. He's literally telling them what to talk about and how to talk about these things in these textbooks. So he's being very clear, not to just say, tell the truth about the history of the development of this country and the development of the capitalist system in this country. He's literally telling them what to say about it. The basic relationship to individual rights and freedoms, not how this government actually denied groups of people individual rights and freedoms for centuries and were forced to change that. Okay, I hope you really understand how messed up this memo is and how it is this memo and not Trump that is at the foundation for the attack on education. And it's been going on all this time. So let's get back to the memo here. So he says that also something he says, comparisons with this basic surface level, not actually telling the truth, not actually telling the real history, but telling a pro-capitalist narrative. And comparing this pro-capitalist, pro-free enterprise narrative that leaves out the genocide, leaves out slavery, leaves out Jim Crow, leaves out discrimination, segregation, leaves out mass incarceration, convict leasing, slave patrols turning into modern day cops, leaves all that stuff out, but just, gives a basic overview of the relationship to individual rights and freedoms. And that literally means saying the US government is committed to human rights, because that's all they say, okay? But he says to compare this watered down narrative, this watered down capitalist propaganda to the systems of socialism, fascism, and communism. You notice how he lumps them all in together, but fascism is not the same as socialism and communism at all. And I don't care how many times people in this country don't believe that, but you don't understand that to be true because You've also been lied to about fascism and socialism and communism. They are not the same things. What we have in this country, this corporatocracy, is closer to fascism than any socialist or communist country. And that's another very long conversation that we're going to have for another day. But I just want you to see how conservative capitalist discourse in this country and in every capitalist country always lumps socialism and communism, which are systems that are foundationally redistributive of the resources of a country to all of the people in the country, so that no one in the country is deprived of their human rights, things like housing, healthcare, education, food, access to a clean environment, those things. Socialism and communism are redistributive systems that ensure people's needs are met in that society. Fascism is exactly the opposite of that. And that's the kind of system we live in, a fascist kind of system. But the way this man set this conversation up, this narrative up, you're always faced with pro-capitalist people comparing socialism and communism to fascism. This is where that comes from. So to Powell, a fundamental undertaking also had to take place to correct the existing imbalance in faculties. An objective, he conceded, that is indeed a long-range and difficult project, yet it should be undertaken as a part of an overall program. This would mean, he says in the memo, urging of the need for faculty balance upon university administrators and boards of trustees. He focused on graduate schools. He focused on publications and popular magazines. He said there should be a fairly steady flow of scholarly articles presented to a broad spectrum of magazines and periodicals, ranging from the popular magazines like Life, Look, Reader's Digest, to the more intellectual ones like The Atlantic, Harper's Bazaar, Saturday Review, New York Post, or, whatever what is it, New York? Whatever it is, magazine in New York that's connected with the New York Times. Anyway, and to the various professional journals. He focused on books, all kinds of books, textbooks, popular books, paperbacks, pamphlets, advocating our side, he said, developing for wide distribution, undertake paid advertisements to promote businesses, and involve stockholders in aspects of the comprehensive campaign. Powell did all of this. He was a businessman, and he was a quote unquote respected businessman. And actually, in Harper's Bazaar, someone named Louis H. Lapham writes that Louis F. Powell Jr. was, quote, a man well known and much respected by the country's business community. Within the legal profession, he was regarded as a prophet. His heavy word of warning fell upon the legions of reaction with the force of Holy Scripture, end quote. His warning prompted corporate interests to take up the challenge that he laid down. So college campuses have been targets ever since, and so have every public school institution in the country. Richard Vedder, writing in Forbes, lays out the conservative campus movement, and it is that as taking, quote, at least 4 forms: entire schools where conservative or traditional values dominate campus life, national organizations promoting conservative ideas, foundations which support conservative or libertarian enclaves on campus, and non-university think tanks and research centers which provide conservative analysis of the world outside the traditional ivory tower, end quote. The article goes on to say that conservative think tanks have been an integral and intentional part of the conservative ascendance in education and political discourse. In a dissertation produced in 1991 called Conservative Think Tanks and Higher Education Policy, Susan Marie Willis found conservative think tanks to be, quote, substantially different from more traditional policy institutions in their open advocacy of a particular viewpoint and in their relative weakness of the scholarly credentials and policy experience of their personnel compared to the more established policy organizations. George Easterbrook, in his 1986 article in The Atlantic called Ideas Move Nations, how conservative think tanks have helped transform the terms of political debate, he said that these think tanks have created an intellectual competitor for the university system, which is good and rendered it dependent on not offering corporate patrons, not offending, rather, with corporate patrons, which is bad. The think tanks created alternatives to the professorate that their creators disdained, as the think tanks like the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Cato Institute grew. Critically placed people were invited to their seminars, conferences, and roundtables, and members of the press became more dependent on them. The article says attacking higher education institution from outside or inside, in the case of think tanks affiliated with perceived to be liberal universities such as CSIS with Georgetown and the Hoover Institution at Stanford, turned out to be an effective strategy. They go on to talk about George Mason University and the money they get from conservative think tanks, Rutgers, Georgetown, and other universities. They talk about Charles Koch and the Koch Foundation, the Liberty Fund, the Olin Foundation, giving hundreds of millions of dollars to campuses to fund conservative ideology on campuses. So what is happening right now with the Trump administration signing this executive order to dismantle the Department of Education? Yes, he is the only president who has ever gone this far, but please stop giving that man credit for this idea. Because this idea to destroy the Department of Education came right out of the out of the mind of capitalist hero Powell, Lewis F. Powell Jr., and the Powell Memo. A link to this memo will be provided in the description for this video when it is done. We're out of time for Darker Than Blue, but stick around, y'all who are watching on YouTube and the other social media outlets for the Dark Room. We're out of time for Darker Than Blue for this week. We'll see you next week. A luta continua. The struggle continues, but if we keep fighting and if we keep learning, Victoria is certain. Victoria acerta. Peace until next time. All right, y'all. Welcome to the after party for Darker Than Blue. Welcome to the dark room where it is extra steamy and really dark in here. All right. I have to go back up because I had to slide down to the end of my notes, but we're really going to dig into this whole situation with this attempt to shut down the Department of Education, which is not going to happen. I know this is a very scary time. And while I am finding my place, oh, yeah, I have to go all the way back up here so I can get to this monologue that I wrote in 2023 that I'm going to read to you because it is directly connected to all of this. Scroll up, scrolly. So let me go over here to the chat and say hey to everybody. What is going on? All of you, I shouted out David Silberg with your funny self. 2 F's, what's going on? 40J Blaze, Snowman, hello. Dr. Dre with Without, what's going on? Yipper 99, Sugar Sham, Leah Boggs, Chichi Matcha 1025, Brittany Bowman, Going down. Lisa Catlett, Erica, Ryan, Rouse, Pasta Soft, Ya Oforiwa, Alex Marquez, Art Patron. Hey, how are you? Okay, that's not everybody, but I'll catch the rest of y'all as we slide on down in this conversation. Hey, Toby, what's going on? Good to see you. All right, let's old Grease. Hey, good to see you. Oh, Red Sea, I'm so happy to see you there. JF, yup, cussing time. Let's fucking go. Because these people have pissed me off. I am so sick and tired of these fucking stupid people. And I can confidently say that these people are seriously uneducated because the conservatives have been doing all this damn time. Okay, so we established that Congress, only Congress, can do away with the Department of Education. And of course, the question is, if the existing law, which I am not sitting here advocating, I'm not. So I'm not going to have this conversation with y'all today about, just because I am mentioning the Constitution and saying that the Constitution says this, it doesn't say that. The Constitution allegedly allows this. It allegedly doesn't allow that. The law says that you're not supposed to be able to do this, but you're supposed to be able to do this. Just because I say those things, that does not mean I am defending any of that shit. I'm not. I understand that the laws and the Constitution and all this bullshit that this country is propped up on is some rickety bullshit lies. Those laws exist to control us. They are not written for the people who are actually in power, and they know that. We're the only ones who don't seem to get that. So I am not sitting here advocating for the support for any of this shit. I'm just saying, I'm just pointing out the contradiction. I'm just helping you to see where the lie is. Okay? I'm not having this conversation with y'all. Not tonight. Well, I don't know where that came from. Oh, that is interesting. I do not know what's happening right now. Let me see. And now you get to see my background. I am not exactly sure. Huh. Oh, well, this is interesting. Okay, there we go. I didn't know what was going on with that other audio happening back there. Whoops. Anyway, all right. So let's get to something that I think is very, 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 very important in regard to education in this country and really how it came about. So something that one of these Republicans said is very important, I think, for us to understand where we are now. And his plans to gut the department may have drawn a lot of criticism from Democrats and education advocacy groups and all that kind of stuff. Even if they admit that the measure is symbolic, and that's kind of the thing that's weird. Everybody knows he can't actually dismantle the Department of Education with an executive order. But nobody is explaining to you why that's true. That they're just feeding into the chaos. And someone said, and this is Carrie Rodriguez, who is president of the National Parents Union. I didn't know there was such a thing, but yes, there's such a thing. She said, let's be clear, before federal oversight, millions of children, particularly those with disabilities and those from our most vulnerable communities, were denied the opportunity they deserved. And, she's right. And this is why publicly funded education was created in this country. And that happened on April 11, 1835. 1835. Now, this is the monologue I wrote for By Any Means Necessary in 2013 on April 11, 2023, on April 11, 2023, to commemorate what happened on April 11, 1835. So let me read it to you. Thaddeus Stevens gave a speech in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in defense of the Free Schools Act of 1834. The day before, the Pennsylvania Senate had voted to repeal that act, but Stevens' speech moved the State House to vote against repeal and the Senate to take another vote in support of free public schools. It would seem to be humiliating to be under the necessity in the 19th century of entering into a formal argument to prove the utility and to free governments the absolute necessity of education. And this is from Stevens himself. These are his words. If an elective republic is to endure for any great length of time, every elector must have sufficient information, not only to accumulate wealth, it's always about wealth. He literally said that, not only to accumulate wealth and take care of his pecuniary concerns, but to direct wisely the legislatures. Thaddeus Stevens is saying that elected officials need to have enough education to get rich. He said it. I didn't. I'm just explaining it. And to take care of the elected officials' economic concerns, but to also direct as a secondary. He literally said it in this order: to accumulate wealth, to take care of that is the elected officials' economic concerns. And the third thing is to direct wisely the legislatures, the ambassadors, and the executive of the nation for some part of all of these things, some agency in approving or disapproving of them falls to every freeman. Stevens continues, then the permanency of our government depends upon such knowledge. It is the duty of government to see that the means of information be diffused to every citizen. This is a sufficient answer to those who deem education a private and not a public duty, who argue that they are willing to educate their own children, but not their neighbor's children. He did say that. But we are told that this law is unpopular, Stevens said, that the people desire its repeal. Has it not always been so with every new reform in the condition of man? Old habits and old prejudices are hard to be removed from the mind, but, sir, much of its unpopularity is chargeable upon the vile arts of unprincipled demagogues. Man, they used great words back then. Instead of attempting to remove the honest misapprehensions of the people, they cater to their prejudice. He said it. I'm just telling you what the man said. He said that these people who don't want free education play on people's prejudices. What I just say. They still do. And take advantage of them to gain, this is what Thaddeus Stevens said, to gain low, dirty, temporary, local triumphs. Ain't they still like that? I do not charge this on any particular party because they're all guilty. Sir, he said, because they're all guilty. I added that, but that's what he meant. Sir, he said, I trust that when we come to act on this question, we shall all take lofty ground. Look beyond the narrow space which now circumscribes our vision, beyond the passing, fleeting point of time on which we stand, and so cast our votes that the blessing of education shall be conferred on every son of Pennsylvania, shall be carried home to the poorest child of the poorest inhabitant of the meanest cut of your mountains, so that even he may be prepared to act well his part in this land of freemen, and lay on earth a broad and solid foundation for that enduring knowledge which goes on increasing through increasing eternity. Those were his words, very flowery, but he said some pretty interesting and important to this very day stuff. And look, how public schools came to be in America might seem like a silly topic, but look at where we are. Aren't you interested to know how it happened? And not just for us with freedmen schools, because remember, we're talking about in this monologue that I read you just half of. This happened in 1860. Let me go back up. Hold on. Let me find the date here. 1834. 1834, the Free Schools Act was introduced. Thaddeus Stevens makes this argument in 1835. So let us the Civil War didn't end for another 30 years, didn't even start. So our ancestors were still enslaved when Thaddeus Stevens made this amazing, emotional, accurate as far as the value of education speech is. So all of this passion and all of it did not apply to us. Okay? But since we are talking about public school education and who will suffer by trying to destroy public school education, yes, how do I want to say this? We are 14% of the population, so the impact will be felt the worst among already marginalized populations because of our small size, and the effects upon us will be what do I want to go, not demonstratively, but I guess statistically worse, because more of our children are educated in public schools. A higher percentage of our children compared to our population are educated in public schools from kindergarten to college to graduate school. So it's a larger percentage of our group of people compared to white people. But numerically, more white people and their children will be impacted by the destruction of public schools. So when Thaddeus Stevens made this argument in 1835, he was literally talking about educating poor white children. So let's continue seeing what he had to say about establishing public schools, free public schools, paid for by the taxes of the rich public schools in Pennsylvania. Because the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1790 took a proactive approach to public education and demanded that schools be established throughout the state in such a manner that the poor may be taught gratis or for free. That is literally a line from the Constitution of Pennsylvania of 1790. Yeah, we were slaves then too. An act providing for this education was passed in 1804 and said that while the poor would be educated for free, remember, we're not talking about all the poor, just poor whites. While the poor will be educated for free, those with the means to pay were required to do so. An 1809 amendment provided a method by which the county treasurer would pay for educating the poor by means of collecting taxes from the people who could afford to pay taxes, which were the landowning and merchant class rich. These acts were received with contempt by both prospective taxpayers, the folks who wanted to be rich, right? And by less fortunate families who didn't want the stigma of being labeled poor. This is why working class and poor white people in this country, this is why they don't align and organize with us, because they don't like being considered poor. They do not. They never have. This gives us insight into this continued phenomenon in this country among the poor. But early Pennsylvanians also fought the establishment of common schools for other reasons that we can still see at work in today's society. Because back then, a sparse population in many areas of the state made the formation of some schools burdensome, if not impossible. Germans were particularly opposed to common schools out of fear that the English language would become commonly accepted, eliminating the use of their native tongue. It's wild that the European immigrants, one of the groups of European immigrants came here, didn't want to have English supersede their language, and now their descendants are the ones who are talking about trying to pass legislation to make English the official language of a country. I cannot make this bullshit up. That's why I read so much to you and give you so many links, because I do not want people on my videos, on these shows, in the chat talking about that's not true. You're lying. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, you can argue with me all you want to. You can't argue with Thaddeus A. Stevens. I know some people would, but the man said what he said. And this is literal history. It is documented. So to argue with your damn mama, don't argue with me, and don't argue with history. Anyway, let's see who are the said eliminating the use of their native tongue. And these people, my document went away. There we go. And these folks, they really do sound like the folks today who don't like, second languages, just being mere options in public schools. And then closed religions like the Amish, Catholics at the time. There were Catholics back then were very, cultish. There we go. I can't think of the nicer word, so I'm just going to say they was fucking cultish. Episcopalians, which is a surprise because I didn't think they were that way at all, but apparently, I guess back in the day, yeah. And Quakers felt that children's education should solely be provided by the church at the time. Bad idea. And I say this as a Christian. While by contrast, Presbyterians, Baptists, and Methodists supported public schools. Don't ask me to explain why. I don't know. As did New England settlers who were used to public education because there was public education in the country that they came from, where they should go back to. But okay. And isn't this a big deal to this day among some folks who claim religious reasons for opposing public school education, but also their opposition to a liberal indoctrination of children that they don't like paying for with their taxes? Isn't this what these folks back then were pissed off about in regard to the potential of free public education? Isn't this the same shit they say about public education today? Yes, it is. And it was the levying of taxes that really pissed people off. The School Act of 1834 created bitter fighting across the state of Pennsylvania. It was favorably received in the northern and western counties. The southern and central counties, however, strongly opposed. Cities generally favored the law, as did organized working men looking to ensure that their children would have the opportunities that education afforded that they did not and that they couldn't afford. But it was the levying of taxes to pay for these schools that angered opponents of them. And it was the taxes that finally enabled the completion of a statewide system of public education that became the model for the public education system in the rest of the country. This is where public education came from. This fight in Pennsylvania over having wealthy people at the time pay for free public education for poor kids. Literally where public education came. So the idea behind public education is literally to educate people who do not have the money to pay for their education. So the idea and to do that so that everyone in society is equipped with enough information to operate responsibly in society. At least that was the argument on paper, right? What these people really meant. Because again, our ancestors were enslaved. So legally, we could not be educated. Again, there's that word, legally, right? So the public school system in Pennsylvania, it wasn't for us. And indigenous people were in the process of being genocided and herded onto reservations in barren parts of Midwestern states. And their children were in the process of being stolen from them and forced into residential schools where they were tortured, beaten, raped, murdered. So we have to keep the establishment of free public education in this country in its correct historical context. And we have to do something that we don't do very often, that I don't think we do well, that I think we need to do better at. And that is when we talk about an incident in history, we need to connect what is going on in the country and sometimes in the world at the same time to really understand what this thing meant and its impact on people that it either impacted significantly or people who were excluded from its impact. Right? So it is important to know both that this struggle in Pennsylvania is where public schools in the United States came from, how they're set up, how they're funded, why public schools are funded through property taxes. Because in Pennsylvania, when the free school system was established, the people who paid for the establishment and the maintenance of free school systems for the education of poor children were property owners. Okay. So that's how public school education came to be in the United States. So when there are coordinated attacks on public school education by politicians today, whether it's pushing the school choice, voucher system, charter school movement, or it's threatening to defund public schools that allegedly teach CRT, even colleges and universities, or include allegedly objectionable material in their curricula, or provide allegedly objectionable books to children in public school libraries, understand that these attacks come from the same class of people who didn't want to pay for public education for poor kids with their taxes back in 1834. The exact same class of people, the rich. And working class and poor whites are convinced by the indoctrination that Powell laid out in his memo that the ideology of the rich, the values of the rich, the goals and the desires of the rich are their desires. That's why working class and poor people do not ever want to organize with, deal with, talk to, listen to, learn about Negroes or indigenous people or queer people or trans people. They don't give a shit about disabled people. They don't care about you being pregnant women and not being given any respect because you are pregnant. They don't care. They literally do not care because they see themselves as temporarily delayed rich people. They see their fortunes being more realistic to achieve by aligning themselves with the ruling class. Which is why whenever the ruling class makes up some bullshit about the niggers are taking shit from you, that's why they always believe those people, even though they don't know any black people. Most of these people don't live around black people. The only black people they know, the only queer people they know, the only trans people they know, most of them do know a lot of disabled people because a lot of them are sick, old white folks who themselves are on Medicare and Medicaid, walking with their walkers and the oxygen tanks and all this kit. But most of these, if you look, this is why one of my favorite websites has always been the U.S. Department of the Census's demographics map. And I have to check to see if it's still there because that demographics map is amazing. Because it literally shows you, or it used to, I hope it's still there, but if it's not, I have to find some content where I have referenced it. And I have referenced it a lot. But the census demographic map shows you where everybody in the United States is living and who everybody in the United States is living around. So you've got a big old swath of this country in the Midwest where there are not a lot of people in general. Population, the Midwest is not heavily populated. Most of the population in this country lives on the coasts. And most of the people in the Midwest are white. Of course, there are some black people who live in the Midwest. It's not a lot. And most of the white people in the Midwest do not live around black people. All you have to do is look at the map. And if you drill down into a state, and if you drill down into a city or a town in that state, then you really get to see, like almost literally street by street, who people live around. And even in many towns and suburbs and subdivisions of cities on the coast where most of our people are, you can find plenty of enclaves, whole towns or neighborhoods where there are nothing but white people. And yes, you find in a lot of cities, places like Newark, New Jersey, right? Houston, Texas, anywhere in the South, where you'll find entire major cities, usually capital cities, and usually cities that are on waterways populated by a lot of Black, Chicano, Mexican, indigenous people. Because our people moved to where the industrial centers were back in the industrial age, because that's where the jobs were. That's why most of our people are concentrated in those places. I hope that map still exists. I am going to look for it. But when we understand that most of the people who support doing away with the Department of Education because of these lies about the Department of Education from conservatives, most of these working class and poor white people, they don't see themselves as poor. Not even these white folks, not even a lot of these white folks who, you know, people are always joking around about hillbillies. Excuse me. You know, and backwoods country white folks, and, you know, not having any teeth and all this kind of stuff. Man, stop joking about people's teeth. It is easy to have bad teeth in this country because your teeth are not covered by insurance, even though they're bones, just like the rest of your skeleton. So people cannot afford to go to literally can't afford to go to the dentist. So that's, but even poor white folks living in trailer parks, and don't be too hard on trailers, because I love a good double wide. Have y'all seen some of these double wide? Man, shit. If I were going to stay in this country, I would buy a double wide and put it on a piece of land somewhere. I would not have a house built. No, I would absolutely buy a prefab. I am from the country. I ain't got no problem with trailers. But yes, poor white people in this country, most of them do not like being called, thought of, seen as poor. They believe the lie about American individualism, about American exceptionalism, rugged individualism. They think that if they just work hard enough, they too will be rich one day. They will never be rich. And those who are waking up to the reality that it is the rich who are the reason that they will never be rich, they still will not deal with us, because they still believe all of the bullshit about socialism and communism being the same as fascism. A lot of them do have racial biases. A lot of them do have gender biases. A lot of them are homophobic and transphobic. So even if they recognize that they have been lied to about their economic situation, they are still committed to pan-European white supremacist settler colonial oppression of the other to maintain what little bit of a standing they realize now that they have. So it's not that they realize what their position really is to the rich, and they're like, you know what? Eat the rich. No, most of them are not. And they're not saying, you know what, those crazy radicals, they have been telling us all this time and we've been cussing them out. We got to go apologize to them people, because we got to really see what's going on with them, because they were serious all this time. So maybe, no, that's not. Some of them will, some will. Most will not. Because their biases are so much a part of their identity as Americans, they really don't think it's racism. They really do think that, look, this is we're all American. Why talk about this? Why divide? Look, stop trying to reason with these people. I really do believe all that, and this is just me. Other organizers will tell you something different, and that's fine. That we can have a multiplicity of approaches to outreach, right? Like there was this one town hall video I saw of this one town hall where it was nothing but white folks. So they were all Republican voters, because it was their Republican representative hosting this town hall, and he is explaining to his constituents why Medicare needs to be gone after. Now, this was an audience full of old, sick white folks, the ones I just told you about. The ones who were in there with their limbs in slings, with their walkers next to the chair, with their oxygen tanks next to the, do you understand what I'm saying? These are old, sick white people who are on Medicare. And they are pissed off that their elected representative, who is supposed to, in an alleged democracy, represent their interests, this man is standing in front of them telling them, oh, we've got this problem, and this is why we need to streamline Medicare. Those white people lost their minds. Those old sick white people were like, shut up. You come here and tell us this. And the next thing you know, somebody started the chant, tax the rich, in an audience of white Republican voters pissed off at their Republican representative for trying to explain to them why they have to cut Medicare. And that man's response was, he was incredulous. He was like, what is happening? And I'm sitting there looking at it going, are they saying what I think they're saying? What's happening? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay. But then I had to stop and think, if I go to that event after that town hall, after that man leaves, and if I go to that event and I want to sit down and have a conversation with these people and explain why this man is saying these things to them, why somebody they voted for would betray them like this, how it's been done to us all this, and I actually, that is a situation where I would go and talk to those people, understanding that even if I say the same things that they just said, tax the rich, they are not going to, most of them, not all, most of them are not going to agree with me, because Leah said, y'all sitting there going, they ain't gonna listen. They ain't gonna listen. You're right. I have to be honest and admit, you know what? It's a worthwhile thing to do. We should. I think that's a perfect example of an opportunity that is presented to left organizers. That's our in, as it were. That's the kind of environment you want to be in that kind of an audience. Understanding that most of those people are not going to agree with you anyway. They're still going to call you a fascist and compare fascism to socialism and then communism. Oh, yes, absolutely. The same thing that happens when we go and talk to our people. So we have to understand. We have to understand that even as these working class and poor white people are realizing that their elected officials have lied to them all this time and are now about to fuck them over, and actually are fucking them over right now, they will not change their perspective on the left. No. We will get some people, a small amount of people who will, but most will not. And that's fine, because we do not need everybody. This is what I think we organizers, one of the things that frustrates me, let me just make this about me and try not to speak for a whole bunch of other people. It is frustrating to have to explain to people all the time that we do not need every single person to make revolution. We don't. There has never been a revolution that has ever happened in any country in which every single person who needed to be involved in the revolution actually was. That's not how it works. So we don't need to convince every single person. We need a good 5, 7, maybe 10 if we get really, really lucky. And by lucky, I mean if we work our asses off collectively. A small percentage of the population who are unafraid who are unafraid to get in the streets, who are unafraid to agitate, who are unafraid to speak out, who are unafraid. See, this is the time we need to make sure people understand, now we need for the people who were happy to take notes, who were happy to, to do stuff in the background. Now we need some of y'all to come out front. Not all of you, just some. And we need more people in this work who are willing to be out front. And we will get some of those working class and poor white people who realize, man, I have messed up. They lied to us about y'all too. I'm so sorry. What can I do to help? We'll get some of those, but it won't be a lot. So what does that mean? That means we have to redouble our efforts to organize our people. And we train up our white allies to go after their people. All right. So let me get back to this. An uneducated population is more easily exploited. And that's the kind of people those in power always want. Capitalism needs a population to exploit. And people who understand that they are exploited and what exploitation is, and that it is unfair and it is unjust and it keeps them deprived, are people who are going to resist exploitation every time. Fight like hell, turn shit over, burn shit down. So capitalist systems and the capitalists and the corporatists who control those systems need to make sure that the population they have to exploit doesn't really understand what is being done to them. Now we go back to Representative Bobby Scott and the Virginia, what he said about Trump and the Powell memo. I really want to read to you what some of the things that this man says in this memo. Powell sent this memo to the U.S. Department of Commerce. He sent it as a secret. It was never supposed to be published. And I don't remember, I don't know how it got out. Somebody leaked it. And it is a manifesto. It's a capitalist manifesto. That is what it is. It is a capitalist manifesto advocating for capitalist control of education in order to facilitate the perpetual exploitation, the perpetual undereducation of the entire population in order to facilitate the perpetual exploitation of the entire population. Powell was talking about college campuses in his memo. But as I said earlier, conservatives were like, nope, all schools, all educational institutions, everybody in them. So he really was focused on addressing what he thought was an imbalance of more liberal ideology and thought being conveyed in America's public education institutions, and that there needed to be more conservative. And I don't know when that has ever happened, but this speaks to how intrinsic dishonesty is to these people, because there has never been an imbalance. There has never been like just a bunch of liberals controlling. And even if there were, like, conservatives and liberals both love capitalism. So liberal ideology is no different in regard to supporting capital than conservative ideology is. So when Powell is focusing on uh, addressing an imbalance on college campuses. He was even lying in the memo, because what he's really advocating for is the conservative control of these institutions and their connected apparatuses, whatever things. So this is why he's talking about graduate school, not just college campuses, but graduate schools and magazines, popular and academic, and books and everything, conservative capitalist control of everything. So Powell wanted the business community to be active, even aggressive in the political arena, which I can't say before his memo they weren't, because obviously this is a capitalist system. The business of capitalism has controlled the development, the establishment, and the development of this entire thing. So capital has always controlled this country, and the narrative of the beneficial nature of capitalism has also always been a part of the narrative of this. So, Powell is laying out an argument in this memo that really is not based in concern for anything that is actually real. Liberals were not like taking over shit and making people empathetic, right? Liberals were not controlling these colleges and universities and making people give a shit about racism and homophobia and transphobia and ableism. And that wasn't happening. But this is what Powell said in his memo. This is why he said these institutions need to be controlled by conservative capitalist, pro-capitalist ideology. So he said that such power, he said political power. This is the thing I want to make sure I didn't forget to say. It was imperative to Powell that the business community become active, even aggressive in the political arena. He said in the memo, quote, political power is necessary, that such power must be assiduously cultivated, and that when necessary, it must be used aggressively and with determination, end quote. Political power is necessary. Notice he didn't say reform. Notice he didn't say when you have political power, you advocate for reforming the system. No, he said political power is necessary and it must be used aggressively and with determination. So if you have political power, when you get it, you don't use it for half measures and bullshit. You use it to take what you want, and to take what you want aggressively. You know who doesn't do that? The judiciary, Powell says in his memo, may be the most important instrument for social, economic, and political change. That's what he said in the memo in 1971. That's right, Punu the punk. What's going on, Punu the punk? Democrats do not use their power aggressively for anything other than enriching themselves and upholding capitalism. So what has been the impact of this memo? That's what we need to get to. We talked about the way Powell and his manifesto for capitalism was described by some leading folks. We talked about the conservative think tanks. And I have to point out that people pay so much attention to Project 2025, as if the idea to eliminate the Department of Education came from Project 2025. It did not. It didn't. I have tried to tell people repeatedly over and over again, Project 2025 is not your problem. That's not where the problem starts. Project 2025 isn't even new. Project 2025 is the rebranded plan for the American century. It is the expanded contract with America. Project 2025 is literally, as far as destroying education is concerned, the capitalist manifesto from Powell, from Lewis Powell. So people focus so much on Project 2025 without understanding that Project 2025 had a foundation that we know nothing about. And as long as we don't know about the foundation, we can never destroy what the foundation supports perpetually. Okay, so you get rid of Trump and you stop Project 2025. The Powell Memo is still adhered to by every fucking capitalist, not just the conservative ones. So what you gonna do about that? If you just focus on getting rid of Trump, you still have to deal with the capitalist manifesto that now, today, controls the entire government. This is why we in the Black Alliance for Peace and actual anti-imperialists all over the world, but particularly in this country, this is why we focus on dismantling systems of oppression and not focusing on one political party or one person. Trump is not the problem. These ideologies that are adopted and supported by both political parties in defense and in support of capitalist exploitation of all of us, that's the problem. You can't vote that out. You cannot vote that out. Okay, so, but people focus a lot on Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation because that's the only conservative think tank they know. And that's crazy because there are so many others. And I just named them: the American Enterprise Institute, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. And I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, aside from the homework that you're going to get when you read all those links that I'm going to put on this video. I want you to go look up all of the colleges and universities in your area, wherever you are. And I want you to search for the acronym CSIS on that college and university's website. And if you come back, if doing that returns information hits, then the Center for Strategic and International Studies has already taken control of those campuses. And then when we look at the think tanks and their influence and how they have gained the influence on college campuses, well, in the Powell Memo, he basically says, pay them. Give them, fund the kind of ideology you want to see out of these institutions. This is why he was talking to the business community, because they had the money to do this. So he's telling the capitalists, if you want to get rid of this rising attack on capitalism that is going to threaten your ability to make the kind of profits that I know you want to make and that you can make off of the backs of all of these people. If you want to keep them from getting in the way of your profit making, you are going to have to use the money that you are making to influence what they learn in public institutions, in educational institutions. So this is why George Mason University gets $30 million in donations, $20 million from an anonymous donor, Who? It's one thing when somebody sends me $20, right? And you know, they it's just their number in the signature line on Venmo, and I don't know who the person is because they don't want to tell me. They just want to be, you know, they just want to be nice to me. And it's like, okay, great, thank you, I appreciate that so much. But if I had $20 million, everybody is going to know who I gave that money. Because I'm not parting with $20 million, you know, because it's Tuesday. 20 million? But an anonymous donor gave $20 million to George Mason University. 10 million came from the Charles Koch Foundation. Now, the $20 million donor, they won't identify who it is, but they know it was a conservative. They know, they just won't, the person doesn't want to be identified, but the institution knows where that money came from. It came from a conservative source. So this is why the donations from these conservative think tanks and individuals and corporations, this is why there is an Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University that focuses on law and economics. George Mason also attracted a public policy center from Rutgers University, which, with a change of name, it's called the Mercatus Center, and more Koch family funding has become a libertarian free market public policy center, George Mason University. Funding organizations like the Charles Koch and Bradley Foundations, the Liberty Fund. Erica mentioned the Liberty Fund a couple of times in this chat. And until its end in 2005, the Olin Foundation, among others, promote conservative values on campuses. Olin distributed about $380 million in total funding, primarily to conservative think tanks, media outlets, and economics and law programs at influential universities. Now, this, folks, I would argue that this is where conservative funding is obviously seen as an advantage the right has over the left, the actual left, not liberals. When Jacqueline Luqman says the left, I mean fucking socialist and communist, anarchists, tankies, and whatever else you want to call us. And yeah, we're going to get into the JFK files probably next week. Because yeah, I have to crow about the fact that we was right. We tankies were right. Fuck y'all. Call me a tanky all day long. I know what this government does around the world. Just because you want to believe these people, every time they carry out a coup against somebody you don't like, then all of a sudden it's a legitimate government. And those of us anti-imperialists who are consistently criticizing these people for their undemocratic actions around the world, you gonna call us names. You gonna call us tankies while you are caping for the fucking imperialist state. Shut up. Proven right by the release of documents under the Trump administration. Jesus Christ. In the 1978 book, A Time for Truth, William E. Simon, who later served as Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration and for more than 20 years as president of the Olin Foundation, channeled the Powell Memo when he wrote, quote, "Funds generated by business must rush by multi-millions to the aid of liberty to funnel desperately needed funds to schools, to scholars, social scientists, writers, and journalists who understand the relationship between political and economic liberty." End quote. Whew. Simon also called on business to, quote, "cease the mindless subsidizing of colleges and universities whose departments of economics, government, politics, and history are hostile to capitalism," end quote. Powell's vision of a broad conservative counterattack on the forces Simon called hostile capitalism became a reality. In their 2010 book, Winner Take All Politics, How Washington Made the Rich Richer and Turned Its Back on the Middle Class, published by Simon and Schuster, political scientists Jacob S. Hacker and Paul Pearson write, quote, "The organizational counterattack of business in the 1970s was swift and sweeping, a domestic version of shock and awe. The number of corporations with public affairs offices in Washington grew from 100 in 1968 to over 500 in 1978. I don't even know how many there are in 2025. In 1971, only 175 firms had registered lobbyists in Washington, but by 1982, nearly 2,500 did. The number of corporate political action committees increased from under 300 in 1976 to over 1,200 by the middle of 1980. On every dimension of corporate political activity, the numbers reveal a dramatic, rapid mobilization of business resources in the mid-1970s as a response, and this is my commentary now, as a response to Powell's memo. It wasn't policy, you see, that Powell's memo was. It wasn't something that was pushed by politicians. It wasn't legislation. It wasn't voted on. It was a memo from a private citizen to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It was a capitalist manifesto that Powell expected the Chamber of Commerce, to distribute to every capitalist entity connected to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That is what was done. And in response, we have the system we have now because this is what they created. And this mobilization of resources helped usher in changes in public attitudes and intellectual fashions. As Easterbrook notes, quote, "During the 1970s, millions of Americans came to the conclusion that liberalism was asleep at the wheel and conservatism became the fashion, a society of like-minded people reinforcing one another's preconceived notions and rejecting any thinking that does not fit the mold," end quote. Through its grant making and philanthropic giving and the establishment of such organizations as the National Association of Scholars, conservatives have built an infrastructure that seemed to have gone unnoticed or not taken seriously by much of the higher education community, and a whole lot of y'all too. Because this is not the first time I have mentioned this damn memo. I distinctly remember talking about this memo when Abdus and I started this damn podcast in 2014. And we were talking about the rise in conservative influence on college campuses that bled into the rise of conservative influence in public schools during the first Trump administration. And what... Conservatives became successful in creating language to make their pitch while obscuring their lying. They are really good liars. Not that they're not like crafty or slick. They're like a hammer and everything is a nail. So they are relentless. That is what they are. They're loud and relentless. Terms like intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity provide cover for limiting free speech and academic freedom to promote free market orthodoxy. They have made the case that Western civilization itself is under attack in the universities, and the job of the conservative foundations and their like-minded brethren is to save it by, of course, changing higher education, and at this point, destroying the Department of Education. Trump has gone further than any president in seeking to overhaul what Republican administrations have long bemoaned as a bloated bureaucracy. Trump's order also amplifies an argument that stagnant student test scores demonstrate that billions in federal spending have not yielded results. The president of the and founder of Parents Defending Education, Nicole Neely, said the status quo has very clearly failed American children and done little more than line the pockets of bureaucrats and activists. And that is true. Well, bureaucrats anyway. And I think, yeah, to some degree, activists too, because, we got a whole lot of opportunists out here chasing the bag and not really doing much for the people. It's true that reading scores for 13-year-olds are about the same as they were in the 70s, and math scores are only slightly better. This is because, though, of recent sharp declines that accelerated during, guess what? The COVID pandemic. Under the Biden administration, the department was fiercely criticized as being overly deferential to teachers' unions, because teachers shouldn't be paid any more money than the bullshit they get paid already to educate everybody's badass kids. And overreaching on certain issues such as student loan forgiveness and its interpretations of civil rights laws on behalf of transgender students. Frederick M. Hess, the director of education policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, another right-leaning think tank, it's a lot of them. The Heritage Foundation is not the only one, said that he believes both the right and the left exaggerate the department's influence. I think that's true. But that the order does little to address the issues like overreach and red tape that drove the movement to rein in the department. These are the words from the article from the Inside Higher Education, not me. Okay. So this person has said, quote, we're going to have this whole national debate and not solve the practical problems along the way, because we're so focused on the 30,000-foot conversation that we're not changing, that we're not fixing the stuff that's actually making life tougher for educators and parents, end quote. Now, I know he is not talking about the same things that we're talking about. He is, of course, being a member of a conservative think tank. He's, of course, talking about CRT and political correctness and gender ideology and all this kind of attacks on traditional value. Yeah, he's talking about those problems. The problems we see with the education system is that it lies. It doesn't tell people the truth about the history of this country, and it does not provide people an education on how this system actually works, because it's not designed to. All of that good stuff about providing free education for the poor, it was never designed to really tell them the truth, just to educate them enough to make them supportive of capitalism and to want to willingly participate in their own exploitation in the capitalist system for the profit of the capitalist class, while the education system is indoctrinating the worker to believe that if you engage in the capitalist system and you do it really hard and you're really sincere, you too one day will become a landowner. So the free public education system that they cooked up in Pennsylvania, it wasn't really to educate the poor whites to really operate well in society. It was created to get them educated enough to follow instructions so they could work themselves to death to make profit for somebody else. And that's what the education system is in this country today. So, let me go on up and see what you all had to say, because I have to not focus on the chat while I'm going through the thing so I don't miss things. But then by doing that, of course, I miss what you're saying in the chat. And I hate that, because you all really do give some fantastic comments and analysis. And the side conversations y'all be having in the chat are as good as anything I am saying. American Kidmer, thank you. Hey, first of all, I think this might be your first time here. Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. American Kidmer says, right, Rahm Emanuel, Democrats been closing down public schools in favor of failed charter programs. Can we talk about that for just a minute? Because this whole thing, y'all are all pissed off. Oh my God, Trump is doing what he's going to shut down the Department of Education. Y'all didn't give a shit when under the Biden administration, Rahm Emanuel and Betsy DeVos, Arnie Duncan pushed replacing public schools in New Orleans. What was left with an entire charter? There are no more public schools in New Orleans. That transformation was finalized by the time Obama got into office. Chicago, same thing. Where Duncan and Obama and Emanuel are from, same thing. And DeVos did the same thing there. Closed down a bunch of public schools, and we talked about it. We talked about it under Obama. We talked about it under Biden. Y'all didn't care. You all, some of you are up in arms, losing your minds, tearing your hair out, about to throw yourself off of something because Trump signed an executive order doing something he legally can't do, and that he knows he legally can't do it. So it's all theater. It's all kabuki theater. But when Democrats were doing the same thing to public schools, not the Department of Education, but to actual schools, that was fine for y'all. Y'all didn't care. That was fine. As a matter of fact, a whole lot of people were like, yeah, those schools need to be closed because those test scores are low. It ain't nothing but a bunch of violence in them schools. These kids ain't learning nothing. They come to school with guns. They come to school for a fashion show. They come to school. This was y'all. This was Black folks talking about why they support charter schools. Why school choice is necessary, because just like those landowning white people back in 1834 who were fine with paying for an education for their children, but they were like, damn, if I'm going to pay for an education for them poor ass kids over there. Y'all who are talking about, well, these public schools need to be closed, and this is why we need school choice. And no, all that is about you will pay for your kids to go to a charter school, to fuck them kids and the rest of them kids in that private school. But the messed up thing about that is you can't even afford to send your kid to a private school or to a charter school because you have to get a voucher to send your kid to a charter school that is paid for by the parents of all those kids that are left behind in public school who can't. Fuck you. And this is a big deal here in Washington, D.C., by the way, which is why I'm so, because two of my neighbors, I literally got into an argument with one of my neighbors because she's coming around and she's, what do will you sign this? What was it? A petition for, opening this blah, blah schools. Okay, yeah, what kind of school is it? Oh, it's a charter school. No, unless we're talking about, an African-centered, that kind of thing, which there is one here in DC like that. But no, I'm not signing out. No, I don't support charter schools. And we had a no, not a white lady. Not a white lady, Yipper. Oops, sorry. Not a white lady. Neighbors. Black ladies. Came to my I have a BAP sign in my yard. I have the sign that says, "Stop the war on Africans at home and abroad. No compromise, no retreat, Black Alliance." How you gonna come to the house with that sign in the yard talking about sign this petition for some charter school? But she did. Advertised, the shows I do on our little neighborhood Facebook thing. Hey, you want to get some political education, listen to my show. They never do. But the lady comes to my door with the petition, and she tells me it's for a charter school. And I was polite at first. I was like, oh, no, yeah, I don't support charter schools. But hey, thanks. Outreach is good. And when I said I don't support charter schools, oh, Sister Girl was immediately pissed. Immediately. Why? That voice went from, "Hi, my name is Ellen," from the, "Hey, I'm just a few houses. Yeah, hey, Ellen, how you doing? Yeah, I've seen you out. Yeah, it's good to know you. Yeah." And when I said I don't support charter schools, I don't agree with them. I don't like them. Why don't you like charter schools? And I was like, let's go there. Let me explain to you why I don't like charter schools, Ellen. And she listened, and then she goes in on the, well, you must not have kids because you must not understand what these kids are like these days. You must not understand what public schools are like, blah blah blah. And I let her go on her thing when she's talking. It's just a fashion show. They always fighting. They don't have no respect for the teachers, and the parents, they ain't raising the kids, and the kids are bringing guns to school, and the blah blah blah. And I'm just standing there, just like, woo, man. If I didn't open this door, I would have swore she was a white lady. But she finished. But she went on and finished, and I said to her, I am an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. While I admit there are serious problems with the education system as it exists, those problems have nothing to do with the behavior of those kids. Have nothing to do with the students or the parents. Has everything to do with who controls the education. And we don't solve that problem by turning the entire education system over to private corporations. Because we're looking at a system that is currently controlled by conservative capitalists of Democrat and Republican ilk. And you are talking about advocating using public funds, my tax dollars, for a voucher for you to send your child to a school that requires a tuition. If I had a child, that would mean that I am taking money that should go to funding the public school for my child and giving it instead to you so that your kid can go to a private school. No, that is not the kind of system that I support. And it kind of devolved from that, from there, to her saying, "You sound like a socialist," and me saying, "I am a fucking communist." And I did say fucking. Loud, to the point where my neighbor across the street, Rob, he's always helping me out. Whenever it snows, he'll come over and clean off my car, because Rob is a younger dude. He's probably in his 20s. He has some trauma issues because that brother was beaten by the police. He lives with his mom. His mom is a former. His mom is a veteran, and his mom is an amputee. She is disabled, and his mom is the sweetest lady. And she was like, when I had my surgery, well, actually, shit, when Abdus died, she was the first person. She came across the street, and she was like, "Sis, anything you need, this is my number. I got 2 grown boys at home. If you need anything picked up, moved, taken out, brought in, hung up, you call us. Call us. You are not alone." When I had surgery, who was here? When I had surgery, she would call me and say, "Go to your door." And I'd be like, "What?" And I go to my door, open the door, and there's a bag of groceries sitting there. So, Rob is across the street sitting in his, in front of his garage like he does most days. And I'm telling this woman, because she's like, "Well, you sound like a damn socialist." And I was like, "Ellen, I'm a motherfucking communist. Did you not see the sign in my yard? I hate this system. I hate everything about this system. I want this country to be socialist. I am fighting for socialism in this country and on the continent of Africa, because Africa's got to be free for all of us to be free, even you with your capitalist ideology." And yeah, she was real pissed off that I so there was cussing and yelling, and I'm finally like, "Get the fuck off my step unless you want to meet my dog." So yeah, I did. I got into an argument about charter schools with my neighbor. It ain't the first argument I've gotten into with these people about their bougie ass ways. But this is the struggle we have to deal with among our own people who have been convinced that their plight or their fortunes will be better if they stick with capitalism. That really it just really is. So I don't know why. I'm sorry. I try to, y'all know how nice I try to be. I try to be understanding and patient, and I try to, but people especially in my own house. I'm in my house. You knocked on my door. You knocked on my door. This is Lukman communism nation. You knocked on my door. And you gonna come to my door with some capitalist bullshit? And then you're gonna take offense when I tell you, yeah, I don't agree with this. I don't support this at all. As if we're and this is why, as I wrap up, this is why, y'all, I don't like when when Black people say we need to unify. We need to be unified. We need unity. Over what? I think you need to tell me what it is we are unifying over. What are we unifying on? I am I gonna unify with Ellen from Four House? The fuck no. She sees me coming walking with my dog, she goes back in the house. I'm not kidding. I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. I wasn't even like threatening to her. And seriously, for those of you who have never seen me, I am 5'1", 167 pounds. I used to weigh around 230. I did before the kidney transplant surgery, but I was still 5'1". There is not much of me. I am not a physical threat to many people. The only people I am probably a physical threat to are very, very skinny men, and women who are shorter than me. Pretty much. That's, and that's that, but that's with my bare hands though. I am also I am also of the belief that fighting fair, who does that? Why? Because if I'm fighting, ain't nothing fair about this. If we got to the point where we fight, what you want me to be fair for? Uh-uh. You wouldn't leave me alone. I didn't want to fight. I never want to fight. But here we are fighting. So now you want me to be fair? We're going to end this as fast as we can. And if I got to pick up a chair to do it, I will. I don't fight fair. What is wrong with you? The people we have to defeat have never fought fair. How the fuck you going to ask me to fight fair? And I'm trying to survive. I'm so confused. So it's we are going to have to deal with this contradiction among our people on this issue of education, because while what Trump is doing or trying to do or claiming he's going to do, with threatening to do whatever, that's I understand why people are focusing on it, because people do not understand how this system actually exists, how it actually works, and what's really going on here. But then there are also, which I think is more important and a much, much bigger issue, the fact that through the education system existing as it has, in a state of obscurity, opaqueness, where the true nature of the system was always obscured, and the people who realized what it was, the crazy radical leftists, most people wouldn't listen to. What has happened is the indoctrination that they talked about in this higher education article. It doesn't just show up in academia. It shows up in our communities, with neighbors like Ellen. Right? With Black folks who are voting for school choice, voucher programs, literally taking public funds from public school funding and using it to pay for tuition to charter and private schools. Because people are more invested in improving their fortunes in capitalism than they are in making sure their neighbors and everybody in this country has or enjoys real equality, the protection of their true human rights. People in this country think human rights means the right to work as many jobs as you want, to make as much money as you want, so you can achieve the American dream. That's how people see the idea of freedom and rights and education in this country. Everything supports the pursuit of the American dream. And the American dream is the preservation of capitalism. The American dream is the lie of individual capitalist success. And that lie is told by the corporate bosses who use that lie to convince folks like Ellen, some of y'all family members and friends, that capitalism will save them. Capitalism is where they will find their liberty. Capitalism is where they find their equality and respect and their standing in society. They get all that through economic success. Whereas socialist, communist countries usually take that capital, the money that the state makes from selling its resources on the open market, and they redistribute those resources to everyone in society to make sure that everyone in society has equal access to the things that make up every human being's human rights: the right to housing, the right to an education, the right to health care, right to food, right to a clean and healthy environment, clean air, clean water, unpolluted land. The bigger issue for me, I think, is not necessarily, and I'm not saying that what Trump is doing is not a problem. What I am saying is what he is doing is not the problem. What Trump is doing is the natural outcome of the problem. And the problem, of course, is capitalist dictatorship. So, that is what I have. Yeah, that's called a bookend, not a butt plug, but okay. I mean, education system being what it is, who knows what a bookend is? Because who reads books? Anyway, that's what I got for this this darker than blue / dark room. It is 7:30. Thanks so much for hanging out with me this afternoon. All of the links to all of the resources that I have referenced in this show will be added to the description of this video when it's done. It'll be up tomorrow at some point, because tonight, dinner, drinks, sleep. Tomorrow, outreach, an event, I think. And then, yeah, so sometime tomorrow night, all the links will be up here. Your homework is to read everything. And remember, and I saw that Leah did Google CSIS for Howard. And of course, CSIS has a presence at Howard University, as they do at every university in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, and most across the country. But still do that homework and go look, Google CSIS at your local college or university's website. See what you come up with, and see the influence of conservative think tanks and ideology in universities across the country. So that's it. Thank you so much. Appreciate you for joining me. I will see you next week. History Rewind on Lukman Nation Patreon this week. Had to take a break this week because I had so much other stuff to do, but we'll be back at it this week. History Rewind is a part of the paid patron content on my Patreon. So you must be a paid patron to access those episodes. Please consider becoming a patron of Lukman Nation and help me continue to do this work. Peace, all of you. Thank you for joining. See you next week. A luta continua. The struggle continues. But if we keep on fighting and we keep on telling the truth about where all of this comes from, I promise you, victory is certain. Victoria asserta. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't believe it were true. Peace.